Hello and welcome to this exam technique presentation that's on 8-mark source evaluation questions. So we're going to have a look at how you structure your answers, how to evaluate sources, and we'll also do some work on some model paragraphs. Here's the question that we're going to work on. It comes from paper 1 of June 2019. It's phrased in the usual way that our source evaluation questions are going to be phrased, and this one focuses on the work of stretcher bearers on the Western Front. The materials that you might want to use when we do this are available on the Pearson website, and you can click on the link in the video description to have a closer look at these. So our two sources are a letter written by a captain from the RAMC and also a painting of stretcher bearers in action. There are two steps to successful source evaluation. The first is to analyse the content of the source, and in that we select and quote specific information in the source and then use our own knowledge to analyse the quotes that we've selected. And we need to do that twice. A quick warning here, it's not enough to just claim that you know something to be true. So that example sentence at the bottom won't quite work for us. The second step to successful evaluation is to analyse the source's provenance, its place in history. This involves characteristics such as the nature, origin, purpose, and intended audience of the source. And again, we need to use our own knowledge and the content of the source to do this. We need to weigh the source. So we need to come up with one positive characteristic and also one limiting characteristic. We need to be balanced. Now this might sound quite tricky, but don't worry, I'll show you how this works later in the presentation. So let's look at the overall structure of our answer. So our question demands that we look at both sources. So that means we're going to write two paragraphs. Now both paragraphs are going to have the same organisation. It doesn't matter if one's written and one's a picture. We're going to follow the same pattern. So our paragraph will firstly look at content. We're going to quote, and then we're going to use our own knowledge to analyse that quote, and we're going to do that twice. Then we're going to look at the provenance of the source, and remember we're going to weigh it. So we're going to have a positive feature and then a limiting feature of provenance, and then we're going to pull things together with a short judgment. If we have a picture source to look at, we're going to follow the same pattern, but we're not going to quote. Instead, what we're going to do is to be specific and describe a feature of the source that we can see. And then we're going to follow exactly the same steps. So let's have a look at how that might work in practice. So let's look at the content phase of our paragraph. The first thing to note is that we're going to start positive. We're going to say that the source is useful. Our examiners won't give us a source that's no good. They're not going to try and catch us out. And after that, we're going to come up with a specific quote. So I've gone for the stretcher bearers. We're so exhausted. You can see I've just lifted the words straight out of the source. And then I'm going to apply my own knowledge to develop that. So I'm going to present that I know that it often took a team of 6 stretcher bearers to lift one wounded soldier back to the trenches. And then if you look, I follow exactly the same pattern and I repeat. I present some knowledge. I then come up with a specific quote. and then I develop that with some specific contextual knowledge. So I'm repeating the pattern. Now there is more that I could pick, but we've only got 8 marks available for this question. So I'm going to limit myself. After I've done it twice, I'm going to move on to the provenance phase. So let's have a look at how this works. I'm very keen on this first sentence. I just reintroduce the source. So I'm introducing this phase of my paragraph. And I'm just noting that the source is a letter home. And it's this phrase here that I'm keen on. And this affects the weight that we can place on it. I then come up with a positive aspect of its provenance, what makes it useful for an inquiry into the work of stretcher bearers. And then I move on to come up with something that's slightly more negative, that's a limiting factor. And I get into that by using the word however. And that signposts to me and my reader that I'm doing something different here. And I've applied my knowledge of the period and the evidence to do that. So I presented, yes, it's a letter home, but that's a problem. And that's a problem, right? Because I know that letters home were censored. And that might affect what our author has written. And then the last step I need to do is to tie things up with a short judgment. And again, I'm going to stay positive. I've just pointed out the limiting factors. But that doesn't mean that our source is useless. Far from it. So a short sentence of judgment ties the paragraph down. So just review that for a moment. You can see we've gone content, and then we repeated by doing 2 quotes, which we applied our own knowledge to. Then we had a positive aspect of provenance, a limiting factor of provenance, and then finally we tied it together with a short judgment. Now, if we had a picture source to look at, we'd follow exactly the same pattern. We'd follow exactly the same model with one slight difference. So you can see I've started exactly the same. I've said that it's useful because it is going to be positive overall. But instead of quoting, I talk about what the source shows. And I describe an aspect of the picture in detail. And then I apply my knowledge to it. And then I repeat. The source also shows. And then another thing that I can see, a specific part of the content, and then I apply my own knowledge to that. And then the paragraph will continue in exactly the same way. I'll then look at a positive aspect of provenance, a limiting aspect, and then a short judgment. So exactly the same pattern for a picture source as well. So if you'd like to take this a little bit further, why not complete that paragraph that we just started and come up with your own analysis of the source's provenance. Try and weigh the source and then tie it down with a quick judgment. And our very last point is that you're going to use this technique when you do paper 3 as well. We're going to have exactly the same question phrasing in a question in the Weimar and Nazi Germany paper. So we can transfer this technique to another exam.